Fam, our guest is here. This guest is awesome, ladies and gentlemen. We first met each other when we were observing the elections in Nicaragua. Uh, I can't, I don't know the gentleman that well, other than the fact that he's an African man with kind of an Italian last name, Caballo, Cabello. It's kind of, what I'm saying, I made him an honorary Italian guy. We had some great conversations. He started this stream, this network, I should say, called African Stream, and man, I can't be any more proud of this dude because this network, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't got on it yet, get on it. He's found a way to communicate in a way and produce small clips where you could see the macro of things that are going on in different countries like Chad or Sudan, whatnot. And after watching his videos, I find myself doing more research, but a great jumping off period of understanding what's actually going on in Africa. Because the problem is, just like in Eastern Europe, or whether it be China or Asia and stuff like that, especially China, Americans have no sense, no real idea of what's really going on other than the bullshit propaganda media that's fed to them. So this is a good taste of reality, of understanding, of information, of education. And I can't be happier that our man, Ahmed Cabello, joins us today. What's up, buddy?
What's up, man? Good to see you both. Good to see you both.
Hey, good to see you. Yeah.
And I really like your presenter voice.
Thank you.
First, Artie's band was banned in the UK and banned here, so I've not been able to see you present, but it sounds really good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Here I am.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
He's talking about you.
But no, this is, it's amazing what Africa Stream is doing. It was so needed. Again, like, I know Archie has been doing a lot of coverage on Africa. But besides that, and like, as you said, it's banned. We just don't see a lot of that in the West, and even in parts of Europe, even Eastern Europe. So it's really great, like, that I'm seeing more coverage, and what I'm seeing in terms of the rising multipolarity and how that's affecting Africa and this Pan-Africanism that we see reemerging. And there's so much to talk about there, so much that's happening. But we are going to start off with Sudan, and I'll let Pasta start off because you were the one that was extremely interested in getting clarification. Yeah.
I wanted to show really quickly, too, as well, the network itself, Africa Stream. It's now at 70,000 followers on Instagram. I don't know where you're at on Twitter.
Amazing.
But everybody needs to jump on this. This is some amazing work. And obviously, you've been getting a little bit more on the scene. I've been seeing a little bit more videos with your pretty face showing up. But I do want to talk about, and you can see, ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and check out Africa Stream. It is awesome. Like, he's taken the whole, what's the word I want to say? The attention span of the West, where you have to grab them quickly, energetically, and you've been able to capture that and get people to come in. And I think it's just almost like it's like the bait on the hook. What made you want to start this network, and what kind of mentality did you have when you were starting to put this stuff together? Because really, to tell you the truth, when I first started seeing your work, I saw your video on Venezuela, but I saw the production wheels there, and I was like, wow, this guy's got a way of producing things and telling stories. And then you were on your way to Bilwi to document that. Tell us the whole kind of mindset of how you started African Stream and what you were thinking about when you started this.
Yeah, I mean, so I worked at Press TV for 7 years. I had a great time, sent me to Venezuela, Nicaragua, Iraq, managed to travel the world. Even Sudan. Obviously, I've been to Sudan many times, but they sent me there on a work mission to do 2 documentaries. But even during my time there, I'd always be trying to push African stories, and they would, understandably, because they're a Middle Eastern network, that say, that's not the hot topic, Middle East, United States, Latin America. So the dream was always to set up my own network, if I could. It was, it felt like a pipe dream at the time. And focus just on Africa, because there's so much interesting stuff happening in Africa. But like you said in your introduction, whenever you read about Africa, it's such surface level, analysis. When they talk about it, they never really ask the right questions. They never really provide the right answers. It's just, about, how many people have died, how many people are in need. And I just thought, there's so much more to be told, especially from a Pan-African anti-imperialist perspective. Because, a lot of these conflicts that you see in Africa, there's usually geopolitics at play, but there's no real, forgive me if I'm missing them out. There's no real other space that I can find that breaks that down. There's some very good podcasts, but there's no real, comprehensive space that breaks down, the geopolitics at play and who's benefiting, and, ask those questions that we try to ask on African Stream. Now, in regards to the second question, why we do it in a certain way, I've always been, I'm trying to remember the film. I think it's Don't Be a Menace, where there's like a guy, he's like a radical, Nation of Islam member, and he keeps preaching to his friends, and his friends are like, get the hell out of here with that preaching stuff. And I've always found myself in that space. My family, my dad's very political, but, other members of my family are not that political. The friends that I grew up with in my council estate in Birmingham are not that political. So I was always trying to create content that I could reach them with, which, we're dealing with topics, but we're doing it in a digestible way that even someone that's not, hardcore into, political news could digest and understand. And that was the thinking behind it. And that's why you'll see, certain things on the platform that are not political. They're about knowledge. Like we go around the streets of Nairobi and we do like a thing called Afri Quiz, where we ask questions like, can you name 3 countries in Africa that end with the letter O? And what African country has 3 capital cities and stuff like that. But the reason why we do that is so that when someone engages with us on that content, they stay on the page, and then we hit them with, Cuba's role in Angola, and some of the more harder political topics. So that was the thinking behind it. Try and make, I think it's not to get too political, but Karl Marx says the point of politics is to change the world. And I think sometimes there's a habit that we get stuck in our own little bubble when we talk to other people like ourselves, and then the net doesn't get cast far enough. Now, the way you guys present Convo Couch is perfect, especially the kind of balance between both of you. So I think you're from the same school of thought as me, that you try to make these tough topics digestible, because at the end of the day, it's not going to be the elites or the academics that are going to change the world. It's going to be working class people. So why make your language, inaccessible, or why make the stuff you talk about inaccessible to working class people? That's the thinking behind, African Stream.
Yeah. And no, that's such a smart way of going about it, especially with Gen Z, because Gen Z is so my sister is Gen Z, and they literally don't pay attention for more than like a minute. And a minute is a lot, right? And so to really get that information out there, you really need small clips. And who's been really good at doing that is the establishment. They pretty much have created this whole entire conglomerate of establishment short clip type of media via TikTok, even via Snapchat, via all these little short videos that they send to kids, and then they look at it and they're like, oh my god, this is what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, this is what's happening in Cuba. Oh, these it's just, or Iran is a great example of when that was happening. And so it's kind of it's so hard for independent media and anti-imperialists in general to produce this, because it requires money, it requires a lot of time, it requires just knowledge. And it's I've always wanted to do something like that as well, but it's just hard to find the time. And I totally get where you're coming from, as well as being a part of a network and wanting them to cover certain things, and then that's why I'm glad I have the Convo Couch, and there's other things I want to explore as well, because it's so hard to get to cover certain things that I think, especially in general Africa, it's really, until recently, I really didn't see the coverage there. And now I've been seeing more and more and more coverage, and I think it's great. As long as people cover, what's actually going on, I think it's awesome. So props to you for doing that.
Yeah, I would just want to piggyback on that and say, yeah, I mean, like what's going on in Donetsk and Luhansk and all these regions over here, we face the difficulties right out of the gate of the suppression, the censorship, all these channels getting taken down. You just mentioned that you didn't get to see Fiorella because it's banned over by you. That to me, like what African Stream has been able to do, and I'm going to bring up the clip right now of the Sudan, right? Because everybody's trying to guess what's going on in the Sudan. What's happening over there? What's going on? I remember when I started watching your videos, I watched your video about Venezuela, and you actually captured stuff on the bridge, and it was like, oh my God, this paints a whole different picture. This is a truth-telling moment over here where the whole mainstream media is suppressing information from one side so they can get their narrative out there. And their narrative, it was the Maduro government, and their military was starting shit, and you had actually captured the people on the other side throwing Molotov cocktails and starting in, and it just painted a whole picture. So when we get shut out of information, it's the worst thing possible. What African Stream is doing right now, and they're starting the talk is starting to come up, right? Sudan, what's going on? Like I said, I had the liberty of watching one of your films before in the past, and Hatemi, which I can't wait for you to explain the whole thing. I'm going to play your clip really quick first from the Instagram, but we can get in there. But I just want to say the information that you guys are providing right now is so valuable, Ahmed. It's so valuable, and I'm so glad that it's here because now I can just say, hey, you want to get a little sense of what's going on? Take a look at this. This will paint a picture, and this will be a great jumping off point for people to look at. So I can't thank you enough, and I want to play this video really quick, and then you can explain to us what is going on. Let me see if I can get to it first.
There's a mute button there.
Burhan heads the country's army. Former ally and enemy, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemeti, controls rapid support forces. Burhan was born in North Sudan in 1960. From school, he went to military college and became a regional commander in the Darfur War. He then fought alongside Hemeti against Houthi rebels in Yemen on behalf of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. During the 2019 military coup against longtime leader Omar Bashir, Burhan was one of Sudan's most senior generals. A few months later, he became the country's most powerful man, heading a transitional military council formed to allegedly usher in elections. RSF leader Hemeti was his number two. The pair led a deadly crackdown against protesters in what's called the Khartoum massacre, which killed over 120 Sudanese civilians. Together, they launched another coup in 2021 against Sudan's transitional PM, before turning on each other. Hemeti has a similar military background. The 50-year-old hails from the Aulad Mansour tribe in Darfur. He's commanded the RSF since 2013 and is accused of atrocities and crimes against humanity in Darfur. Hemeti holds most of Sudan's gold mines, giving him further power and wealth. Burhan's army controls Sudan's key industries, including agriculture, meat exports, and car factories. Two military leaders are fighting for power in Sudan.
Yeah, so just quickly on that, we've actually got part 2 coming out because of this whole Gen Z thing. We knew that if we made it too long, people wouldn't watch. Some people would watch, but other people wouldn't. So we split it into. So the first part was just, basic background into who they are. The second part is who's backing both, which, is a lot more, a lot more interesting from my perspective. But it was, I just knew that there was too much information to put in one video. Yeah. And in the current climate, so we split it into 2. The part 2 is coming out tomorrow, actually.
That's awesome. Okay. Because go ahead, fam. You have questions first, because
no, yeah, I do have a question, because it's kind of like, I've been covering this a lot on RT, but even the coverage there, it's we do have like correspondents in the continent in general. We do have like great correspondents that actually know what's going on. But for a lot of people who have never even heard of anything related to do with Sudan, it's like, whoa, what's going on here? So if you could just give like a brief Synopsis, because what we've been talking about is obviously the facts, right? I think at this point over 300 people have been killed. There were supposed ceasefires negotiated. That was said in the media, but on the ground, all of the locals were saying there was no ceasefire. It was not respected at all whatsoever. Now you have the RSF paramilitary group, and then you have the Sudanese, and then you have the United States coming in, and Biden recently implementing legislation that will sanction the people who he deems, that the United States deems, are destabilizing the country and preventing it from creating this new government that's going to be democratic. So whenever the United States is involved, and whenever I see Anthony Blinken and the State Department, they're talking about, oh yes, we're going to sanction. First of all, it's absolutely ludicrous to me that they're going to put sanctions on Sudan, period. Okay, like at this point, it's insane to me. It's not surprising, but it's crazy, and I'm really suspect of the United States is seemingly like just increasing interest in Sudan. Can you give us a little bit of rundown as to why that may be?
And can you really go from the point of the two generals and the two armies? Because a lot of people are going like, Sudan, I have a Cadillac, Sudan. They don't even know about a country in fucking Africa. And it's like, guys, come on. Can you explain the two generals and the two militaries? And if there is a government in between these two, just because you know so much about this region, it's great. Go ahead, buddy.
Sure. So yeah, there was obviously a dictatorship in Sudan for 30 years. During that dictatorship, because so much of the money was being siphoned off to offshore bank accounts, the development in the periphery regions, places like Darfur, Nuba Mountains, Blue Nile, was extremely limited. So there was like these rebellions that were popping up. So Bashir started, the Janjaweed, backed them in, they had historic tensions with the 4 tribe in Darfur, and then he armed them to the teeth, and they were the Janjaweed. They then morphed into the Rapid Support Forces, which is now 100,000. After the war in Darfur, Bashir was extremely concerned that there might be a coup against him, so he kind of used the Rapid Support Forces as his kind of private military army to kind of make him kind of coup-proof. But he didn't predict that the Rapid Support Forces would join the army and actually engage in a coup and remove him from power. That's a very, very basic, understanding of, up to 2019. I've skipped quite a lot of details in that, but we'd be here all day. And then in 2019, the Rapid Support Forces and the army, they come together, form a military council. Now, an important part of this story is the leaders of both the Rapid Support Forces and the army are, historically been very close. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, aka Hemeti, they were both fighting in the Saudi-led war on Yemen. So while Saudi Arabia and the UAE were bombing from the skies, it was the Sudanese soldiers, army, and Rapid Support Forces that were engaged in the on-the-ground battle with the Houthi Ansar Allah, fighters. So that is when they first kind of, orbited towards, the Persian Gulf states of Saudi Arabia, the UAE. And, in many ways, that's what probably led them to removing Bashir, because they thought they had like regional backers. Now, what's the conflict about now between these two guys? Well, it's an interesting one because there's so many different, theories on the ground of what this is and what it might be. And, one of the theories, it's a bit of a conspiracy theory, but I'm just going to tell you what it is that both of these generals have manufactured this situation to create as much chaos as possible in Sudan so that there will never be a transition to democracy, and that the Sudanese people are in such a desperate situation that they will be like, forget elections or democracy, just give us peace and stability. You know, that's one of the theories. You know, how true that is, I'm not sure. The other theory is it's just, you know, good old fashioned two greedy generals. You know, Burhan was concerned that Hemeti was becoming too powerful, so then wanted to marginalize him. Hemeti understood that Burhan was trying to marginalize him, so did an offensive, and then there was this back and forth. But then there's so many complicated factors in all of this. You know, who backs who? The Egyptian army backs Al Burhan for several reasons. One of the reasons is, I don't know if you guys know about Egypt's beef with Ethiopia over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam.
We've done stories on it. We know quite well about that whole funded, half the dam funded by the Chinese, by the way. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, you know, for Egypt, they see this as an existential crisis because so much of their economy relies on the River Nile. And if the dam comes into fruition, it already is, you know, being built, then they're saying that it'll affect the water supply in Egypt. Now, the River Nile obviously runs through Sudan. And actually, from a Sudanese perspective, the dam is a good thing because it could help control the water banks. You know, every year, agricultural lands get flooded by the River Nile. So something that could control that would actually benefit Sudan. But since Burhan came into power, he's been siding with Sisi in this conflict against Sudan's national interest, because obviously he gets backing from Egypt. You know, Egypt gives Sudanese army, you know, arms and support and whatnot. So that's Egypt. Then you have Israel. You know, Israel normalized relations with Sudan. I think it was, you know, part of the Abraham Accords led by Donald Trump. You know, Sudan has historically always been hostile towards Egypt from 1948 to 1967 to 1973. In fact, there was the three no's: no to recognition, no to normalization, and no to, I forgot the third one. But that conference actually happened in Sudan in 1967. So there's a long history of Sudan supporting, you know, Palestine. And under Omar al-Bashir's rule, there was support provided by Sudan to Hamas. So you know, from Israel's perspective, it doesn't want you know, anyone else apart from Burhan to come into power, because that could lead to you know, a reversal of that normalization. Then we have the United States. So, you know, and the United States is allegedly backing Burhan, although it's giving the signal that it's backing both sides, as it does in these types of conflicts, for several reasons. You know, I'm sure you guys have covered the Russian naval base story, which will be the first, I think, in Africa for Russia. So essentially, kind of like, in a way, what Syria is to Russia is what Sudan potentially could become. And, you know, an attempt to stop that. You know, the US ambassador to Sudan, John Guthrie, warned Sudan that building a Russian naval base would bring dire consequences. You know, we're seeing those consequences now, arguably. But when the Russian deal was signed with Sudan, the one stipulation was it had to be, you know, authorized by civilian government. So from an American perspective, if you keep, you know, if you destabilize Sudan, it delays a civilian government coming into power and authorizing that Russian naval base. But there's also something else going on. So, you know, the TPLF was obviously backed by the United States for 30 years. I think they came into power in 1991, left power in 2018. 30 years, the United States had a staunch ally in the Horn of Africa, which was the TPLF. That's why they backed the TPLF against Abiy Ahmed in the Tigray conflict. Since Abiy Ahmed came into power, Ethiopia and Eritrea have become closer. Historic enemies are now at peace, and the United States is now missing a crucial ally in the Horn of Africa. What Burhan represents for them is a staunch ally, a potential strongman ally that they can rely on to further their interest. During the Ethiopia-Eritrea conflict, during the Ethiopia conflict in the Tigray, Burhan was actually providing support for the TPLF against the Ethiopian government. It was also supporting Egypt in the Ethiopian dam conflict. And it's also normalized relations with Israel. So 4 things that indicate to the United States that this is a guy that we can rely on. Now, to the other guy, Hemeti, he's supported by General Haftar in Libya. He's also supported by the UAE. He controls the biggest gold mines in Sudan. Dubai is a hotspot for, rich Arabs with too much money buying gold, as well as other people in the region. And, there is allegations that he is supported by the Russians. There's, there's claims, I don't know how real this is, in the Western media, so it's unclear how reliable that is, that the Wagner group has been protecting Hemeti's gold mines in Darfur, and that this gold has been used to circumvent US sanctions. But how true is that? We don't know. So as you can see, by everything I've just explained, it's quite a complicated mess.
I'm getting confused here. Wait, so the Russians are back in Hemeti, but they're also in line with Bashir because of the Red Sea base? I mean,
not Bashir. So the deal for the Russian naval base was agreed by the military council. Number 1 in the military council is Burhan. Number 2 is Hemeti. So it was a deal agreed by both. Yeah. Mm-hmm. However, the allegation is that the financial interests are related to the gold, and the gold mines that are controlled by Hemeti. Well, the day of the conflict started on Saturday, April the 15th. Anthony Blinken tweeted on the 14th, I'd just spoken to General Burhan, and I'd just spoken to General Burhan about this transition to democracy. Well, I don't know if Anthony Blinken might be the most unluckiest guy in the world, but he speaks about transition to democracy, and the very next day, full-blown conflict starts between the 2 generals.
This is crazy.
Yeah,
I can't even follow this. Wait. So Burhan and Hemeti, what's the difference between their armies and their militaries? Because it seems like superpowers or just other entities are kind of just trying to back both sides, that whoever gets into power they'll have influence with. That's what I'm
exactly
trying to what I'm grasping at.
Yeah, exactly. Because on the other side, Hemeti tweeted that he's spoken to the head of AFRICOM. So again, the US indicating that he's, I think for the US, it'd rather, have a military in control than a paramilitary, just for the optics, first and foremost. But
which one is that? Which one's the military?
So Hemeti controls the Rapid Support Forces. That's the paramilitary. Okay. And Burhan controls the Sudanese army. The paramilitary is 100,000 troops. The Sudanese army is about 130 to 150,000 troops. However, the paramilitary are hardened vets, because not only have they been fighting in Darfur, Nuba Mountains, Blue Nile, they've also been paid guns for hires used in Chad, used in Central African Republic, because since their inception in 2003, these guys have to be paid, otherwise they dismember. So Bashir was very comfortable in allowing them to go here, there, and everywhere to get involved in every single conflict that happened in the region, from Libya to Central African Republic to Mali to every conflict you could think of in the Sahel region.
One of our commentators our audience members just said it's hard to grasp because we tend to want to identify a good guy and a bad guy. That's a really good point I want to make. This is extremely nuanced and complex. Would you say that there are no good guys and bad guys in this whole conflict? That's why it's
definitely. And that's why you see no support Usually, if there's a paramilitary group, occupying parts of the country, the people would rally behind the army. But that hasn't happened because, the Sudanese army's conducted 7 coups since Sudan's independence and attempted, I think, 14 coups. And the Rapid Support Forces was part of the army until this recent kind of breakup. Although it wasn't officially incorporated within the army, and that's one of the causes of the conflict as well. So yeah, there is no good guy or bad guy. I think the problem we have in all of this is it just shows the problems with a leaderless revolution, a revolution that's not backed by any theory, any revolutionary theory. The people of Sudan, they came together. They were angry about, Bashir's reign, but there was no kind of mobilizing figure that's going to lead them to the promised land. There was no Fidel Castro or Thomas Sankara or, Muammar Gaddafi. So what happened was we got rid of Bashir, and then it was like, okay, so now what next? But all of his generals and all of his paramilitary forces, they were still part and parcel of the makeup. So anyone, from afar could see that it wasn't, you got rid of one problem, but there was like much bigger problems in the future, and these bigger problems are now starting to manifest.
Yeah. So would you say Hemeti's still getting funded by the UAE?
Yeah.
More than anything, where are they getting the majority of their funding? We would understand that. What's his name? The other general who was Burhan, right?
Yeah.
How do you say his name? The one who
Burhan.
controls the Sudanese army. Where are they getting their weapons and funding from? Mostly from Israel or
Egypt?
Mostly Egypt, right?
Mostly Egypt, yeah. So Burhan gets most of his funding from Egypt. With there's even rumors that the Egyptian army at some point, if it escalates, might even invade in support of the Sudanese army to quote unquote quell the rebellion. And Burhan gets most of his, some weapons smuggled in through Libya, through the warlord General Haftar, and a lot of the finances from Hemeti. And another part of this story is how strategically important the Red Sea is, which Sudan has access to.
Yeah.
It's one of the richest, most important, strategically important pieces of water in the world. It gives access to the Suez Canal, gives access to the Middle East, access to the Horn of Africa. So, everyone kind of wants a piece of this kind of important piece of land. Saudi Arabia is also involved. So the Saudi Investment Fund has put billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's unclear who they're backing with this because previously they backed, Burhan and Hemeti were both fighting on their behalf. The UAE only favored Hemeti because of the gold that he controls.
This is crazy.
Yeah, and I just want to go ahead and also talk about what are the possibilities of where this conflict is going. Where do you see this? Because this is what I think the 4th week of just the the back and forth. A lot of people being displaced, hundreds of thousands of people now being displaced. And going into other countries, and of course, the sanctions that the United States has decided to go and impose. Where do we see this conflict leading to in terms of the country, but also in terms of perhaps a resolution? Because there's been talk about a ceasefire, but it seems like that really never actually got off.
Yeah. Well, the worst case scenario is that this could lead to a full-fledged regional war. If Egypt does intervene, and then General Haftar intervenes on the other side, we can see what happened in Libya. There was these 2 warring factions with a host of countries, Turkey and Israel back in one side, and then the UAE, allegedly Russia and co back in the, and it just led to an ongoing conflict with the Libyan people in the middle, caught in the crossfires. So that is, a very real concern. another concern, if the conspiracy theorists are right, and that actually both of these generals, you know, have hatched this plan to destroy the country, terrorize the civilian population, so that any idea of civilian rule is kind of put on the back burner, then they could potentially keep fighting, and then, like all wars, come to some sort of negotiated settlement, which allows them both to have, you know, pieces of the pie. But either way, it's, you know, it's not good. It's not good. You know, my family are in the middle of the fighting at the moment. My father is in Bahri, which is occupied by the RSF. And yeah, it's just terrible. Like, dead bodies are in the street. You know, blood banks have run out of blood. 70% of the hospitals are closed. You know, the water is contaminated because of the dead bodies. Children are dying in hospitals because of lack of oxygen. Polio vaccines have been, you know, have gone missing. You know, the war economy has inflated prices of everything: food, water. There's no electricity. We spoke to my dad 2 days ago, but it's because he had a bit of car battery, so he managed to plug his phone into his car. It's just an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people have left the country, but for poor working class Sudanese people that have nowhere else to go, it's a complete and utter disaster. So yeah, you know, it's bad. It's bad.
I just put up a little map of Africa right there so people can see the Red Sea and how important it is. You were mentioning before, you know,
Yeah.
Geographically, you know, especially a lot of people think that, you know, what you had talked about, that the West is making sure that there's conflict going on. So therefore the Belt and Road Initiative can be slowed
Definitely.
down for the Chinese, because it's very important to them to, you know, and the Russians to have that naval base and that port over there in Sudan.
Definitely. And also an important point to mention is Kamala Harris just visited, you know, Africa. She visited Zambia, Tanzania. I'm trying to think what other countries, but anyway, she went out to Ghana, and it was meant to be this whole big PR campaign about, you know, the US's re-engagement with Africa, and it was the worst PR campaign ever. She just got absolutely humiliated everywhere that she went. You know, regardless of what you think about the LGBTQ agenda, she was, you know, heavily criticizing Ghana for pushing that. And, you know, not that everyone in Ghana is against, you know, LGBTQ people, but they just thought it was widely hypocritical when the United States backed Saudi Arabia, you know, Qatar, and all these Middle Eastern countries that are rich in oil that, you know, execute gay people, and just thought, so why are you kind of wagging your fingers at us? She was criticizing Ghana for obsessing about China. On her trip to Zambia, there was a speech by, you know, the leading opposition figure in China, where he was criticizing the US for its role in the region. And, you know, after that trip, after that disastrous PR campaign, now we're seeing this huge destabilization. And in every media appearance, every mainstream media appearance that I've made so far, they're always asking me, oh, so what should the US do? I was on TRT yesterday, and I was saying, what role can the US do? Can it intervene and stop both sides? And part of me thinks that actually a hot conflict in somewhere like Sudan actually helps to rebuild, you know, obviously not amongst the anti-imperialists, but we're in the minority, but amongst the masses, helps to rebuild the so-called need for the US in the region, because people think, oh, we need the US to step in and negotiate a ceasefire. Oh, we need the US to step in and negotiate, you know, some sort of settlement and peace. When before that, you know, during Kamala Harris's visit, everyone was saying, what does the US do for us? These structural readjustment programs from the IMF destroy our economies. You know, they sanction all these countries in Africa unless we play ball, destabilizing our economy. They make us use their economy. So there was a growing united kind of sentiment against US hegemony that we hadn't seen since the 60s. And I feel like, you know, this conflict in many ways could be seen as an attempt to reverse that kind of sentiment.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to ask you about that because there has been a lot of criticism coming from Africa against the United States. When Lavrov arrived and did his tour in Africa, he was welcomed with open arms in comparison to when Anthony Blinken went. It was just a completely different sort of reception. One of the things that both Russia and China criticize about the U.S. policy towards Africa is this neo-colonialist mindset, specifically what you're talking about, like pretty much attempting to control Africa, to sort of morally pontificate about, you know, going green and LGBTQ issues or whatever issue it is that is, you know, a very European Western type of issue, while obviously the continent of Africa itself has the most natural resources that have been exploited for decades and decades and decades, only to be used and profited off and pretty much given to the West. And so there has been, I've seen this rise in anti-Western sentiment, or at least in saying things out loud. For example, the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, pretty much went after the not just the United States, but the West as a whole, and the the International Court of Justice, the ICC, for trying to put this arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, saying, well, where were they for all these other times? They didn't do that. It's very biased. And so there's been a lot of this sort of thing going on. Do you see that in any way, maybe because of everything that's happened, because of we've seen the rise of, you know, multipolarity, de-dollarization happening, that there could be more of a role that, say, China or Russia take, or a role that the people in other African states take as well, to helping resolve this conflict? Because the other question is, well, Africans need to resolve this conflict themselves, that without any outside aid.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that I hear, I live in Africa now, I'm in Nairobi speaking to you guys right now. One of the things that people tell me when I have these conversations with them is, you know, the West likes to talk about human rights and democracy promotion, but the Chinese come and build stuff. And it's just a real difference. You know what I mean? Like, if you guys visit me in Nairobi, and that is an invitation, please do come. I'll pick you up from the airport and we'll go across the express highway and we'll get to my house in like 20 minutes. That express highway was built by the Chinese. So you can see real tangible difference. And that's why we saw in Zambia and all these type of places. I think it was a few years ago, but the clip recently resurfaced, and it was the German ambassador. Sorry, it wasn't in Zambia, it was in Namibia. The German ambassador saying, oh, the Chinese, you know, they've got too much of an influence. And he goes, why do you Europeans obsess about the Chinese? You know, it's you guys that committed a genocide against the Herero and the Namba people here. It's you guys that have our schools in European museums. It's you guys that have our stolen artifacts and won't return them. And then in regards to Russia, you know, African people have, you know, memories and understand that during the apartheid regime, the Russians were supporting the liberation struggle. The US and its allies in the West were supporting the apartheid regime. And the same thing in what they call, you know, Southern Rhodesia and Northern Rhodesia. Same thing in Angola. Whenever there was a liberation struggle, you know, in Africa, you could rely on Russian support. You could rely on the US to be supporting the reactionary forces on the ground. So all these things matter. Also, when it comes to representation. So vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine, all of a sudden we're told that African voices matter. Yeah, they're like, you must condemn Russia, you must condemn Russia. But when it came to Libya, African voices didn't matter. When it came to Iraq, African voices didn't matter. Afghanistan, In fact, I didn't even ask what we thought about those conflicts. But now all of a sudden, you must condemn Russia over Ukraine. You must condemn. So, everyone can see the hypocrisy. It's so blatant and so, so obvious that people can see it. This image that you showed regarding refugees. I hear the argument that, refugees because it's happening in Europe. Well, the United States is not in Europe, but there's no support for Sudanese refugees in the United States. There was refugee programs happening all over the world for Ukrainian refugees. No such thing for Sudan. So people can see, you only really want our voice when it suits you. When we're dying, no one really cares. And that's what's caused African states to finally unite on a unified front and realize who actually does benefit our interest and who doesn't benefit our interest. And actually, some of the more favorable trade deals that Africa's got from the United States recently is only because there's a China and a Russia. If there was no, multipolar kind of system, if there was no competition, we'd be left to the mercy of the IMF and the World Bank with these, austerity programs. When they dictate how you should spend your national budget, you should cut spending for teachers. You should cut spending on health. You should prioritize, imports from American companies. You should limit your exports and make sure that you only export raw materials. You only export things like cocoa, but you don't export the chocolate which cocoa is used to make. So yeah, there is, it felt like such a perfect time to launch African Stream because it felt like we're in a very, very special time where African countries were coming together and not speaking as one, but speaking as a unified force. And I can't help but feel like, there's obviously no evidence behind this, but this kind of conflict, which might be just one of many conflicts that are launched in the region, is a way to kind of put us back in our place.
Well, the one thing I disagree with you when we were talking about Nicaragua is I said, the problem is, Ahmed, we don't know who we're actually fighting against, right? Like, the belief of nation states and these like bloodline oligarchs that I kind of mentioned. And this is the thing. I think sometimes my anti-imperialist leftist friends, they don't sometimes acknowledge globalism of sorts, right? Like think it's more of like a form of capitalism. What happened where I say there's a global agenda and that's kind of not talked about, but there is this from that truther community. When I talk to them, there is this reductionist kind of mentality where they want to say it's all about this one global plan going on. And that kind of lessens and reduces the actual threat that's coming from the West and how they behave militarily wise. And I saw that African Stream picked up on that. I forget his name all the time. I don't want to say it wrong, but the Greek economist who talked about China and soft power. I think you guys were doing a video on it. I couldn't find it on it right now, but that is so important. We have to acknowledge that. And there has to be a way where we can kind of look at both of these things objectively, understanding that there is a global agenda, but also that doesn't reduce the actions and the behavior of the West. Because at the end of the day, before we start talking, I want the West to put down their guns, close their bases, let these countries have national sovereignty. And then we can also kind of focus on, well, what is that global agenda? What are they trying to do to have control across the board? And that was one thing I think when you said, no, we know who we're fighting against. I'm like, no, we don't. I think these people are more of a secret society behind the International Bank of Settlements, behind the driving forces of the IMF. But that's a discussion for another time. I think we've been on long enough. Fam, did you have anything else? I definitely wanted to play the Chad video on the way out because I think it's just an amazing video. I know we don't have time to talk about it, but it is just an amazing story. Fam, did you have anything else before I play that video?
I was just going to ask you about the Chad thing, but if you want to go ahead and we can just close with that, because it's in the title. So I thought you might want to ask about that. But
let's play the video, Ahmed, and then we'll just give us a little quick 1, 2, 3 out and let everybody know where they can find you and when we're coming to Nairobi. That's all I want to know. And yes, I let it play out all the way because the music and the beat was hard. I had a friend of mine,
The
I
beat was
shared it with him. He watched it 3 times, and I can see him going like this. Like he was looking, he was engaged, he was there.
Yeah.
He was like, holy shit, but he was also doing this. You know what I'm saying? Down to the beat. Ahmed, I mean, seriously, this is African Stream is friggin' genius, and I fucking love it. I'm addicted to it. And please give us a little bit a quick opinion about that, and then let everybody know where they can find you, how they can support the show, how they can support your work, and let us know the prices on tickets to Nairobi so we can start a GoFundMe for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because the current president, Mohamed Deby, is the son of Idriss Deby, who has been a long-time French puppet in the region. And there's been a lot of protest against him, against his son, because he hasn't, transitioned to democracy. But it's really against something that's happening throughout the whole of Africa, a rising anti-French sentiment. I probably don't have time to get into it, but France's role in Africa, people talk about what they did in the past, but they don't understand, what France is doing currently in Africa. But there is, I talked about how promising it is because we're seeing places like Burkina Faso and Mali, coming together, and there's talks of them even forming a federation against, France's continued role in the region. France went to Mali and Burkina Faso to support them in terrorism, and all that both countries found was that there was more terrorism after the French came. And so, there's been this huge awakening. France 24 has been kicked out of both countries, as well as French media, because they realized it was actually a destabilization center. And they actually interviewed Al-Qaeda affiliate group on France 24, which led to them being kicked out. So we could get into all of this, but essentially, people in Africa are mobilizing and forcing their leaders to actually represent their interest, and their interest doesn't rely on the former colonial powers, all of whom, by the way, this is going to be the next story that we do. If you look at all the former colonial powers in Africa, I could quickly go through them. All of them are members of NATO. So that also speaks to why, Africa doesn't want to take a position against Russia in regards to Russia-Ukraine. Because basically, if they were taking a position against Russia, they'd essentially be backing all of their former colonial powers who have not even, made good in regards to the crimes that they committed against African people on the African continent. And I'll leave it there.
Great story.
Awesome. There's your global agenda right there. Ahmed, where can people find you and donate to help you out?
Yeah. By the way, really quickly, I just want to say that story to me is so intriguing because it shows you the people forcing their leadership to be scared of them and to do what they want to be done. Now, that might not be the final solution right there, but the fact that he had to pardon rebels that killed his father, because that's the whole mentality about that, it's great. But please continue and let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I know you saw me on my you saw me a few times recently, but I'm trying to be more in the background, so it's all about African Stream. I'm helping with the scripts, helping with the stories, but it's all about, my presenters. I'm trying to put them in the limelight. So just forget about where you can find me. You can find African Stream on TikTok, where we've now got 280,000 followers. And rising. You can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Twitter, and you can find us on YouTube. Hopefully we'll be launching a podcast very soon, and obviously as well Facebook, but Facebook is a dying art form. But yeah, you can find us on there.
Yeah. I love the way
Awesome.
Fee goes. I'm going to be in the background, but he comes out to give Prince Charles or King Charles a kick in the nuts. He came out for that one, though, right there. I love that. You get a chance to give the royalty a shot right in the nuts. He comes out. Ahmed Cabello, ladies and gentlemen, African Stream. Go follow them. Go find them. Help them out. They got great work going on over there. We appreciate you coming on the show, and we look forward to seeing you in Nairobi.
Sure.
Thank you.
And please send me some of your clips from RT, on WhatsApp. And
Oh yeah, for sure.
Help me beat the censorship. Help me beat the censorship.
For sure. Take care. See you soon.
Cabello, everybody.